The morning Margaret Hartwell received the letter about her inheritance, she was sitting in her 12-year-old Honda Civic, counting quarters from the cup holder to see if she had enough for a tank of gas. Outside, the bitter Montana wind rattled. The windows of the abandoned gas station where she'd parked, hoping to avoid the repo man who'd been circling her apartment complex for the past week. Her daughter Emma sat in the passenger seat, pretending to read a library book while stealing worried glances at her mother's trembling hands. Margaret stared at the official-looking envelope that had somehow found its way to her despite 3 address changes in 6 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The return address read, Patterson Associates, Estate Attorneys, from somewhere in Cedar Ridge, Montana, a place she'd never heard of. With $27 to her name and an eviction notice that expired tomorrow, she almost laughed at the irony. What could she possibly inherit? Her family tree was full of coal miners, factory workers, and people who died with more debt than assets. The letter inside was brief and puzzling. Her great-uncle Samuel Court, whom she'd never met or even heard, mentioned at family gatherings, had passed away 45 years ago due to a complicated series of legal disputes and missing documentation that had only recently been resolved. She was now the sole inheritor of his property, 15 acres of land and a farmhouse in Cedar Ridge, Montana. The lawyer's note at the bottom was handwritten. The property has minimal commercial value. Previous attempts to sell have been unsuccessful. Transfer can be completed immediately if you wish to claim it. Margaret looked at Emma, who had given up pretending to read. At 9 years old, her daughter had developed an unsettling ability to sense when things were dire. The past year since David's death had aged them both. Margaret from the crushing weight of solo parenthood and mounting bills, Emma from watching her mother slowly sink beneath them. The life insurance they'd counted on had been nullified by a technicality, leaving them with funeral costs and a mortgage they couldn't maintain. Margaret's job as a geological surveyor for the state had been eliminated in budget cuts 3 months ago, and despite her expertise in mineral analysis and terrain mapping, she'd found nothing but closed doors. Margaret turned the key in the ignition, wincing as the engine struggled before catching. "How do you feel about a road trip?" she asked Emma, trying to inject lightness into her voice. "To where?" Emma's eyes narrowed with the suspicion of a child who'd heard too many false promises lately. "Cedar Ridge, Montana. Apparently we own a house there." The drive took 11 hours, with stops only for gas. Using the credit card Margaret prayed wouldn't be declined, and bathroom breaks. They drove through the night to avoid spending money on a motel, taking turns sleeping, while the other kept watch. Margaret had Googled Cedar Ridge during a rest stop, finding little beyond census data and a single photograph of the main street that looked frozen in 1975. Population 1,200. Primary industry, lumber. Though the last mill had closed in 1995, the town survived on ranching and the occasional tourist who got lost on the way to Glacier National Park. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, they followed increasingly narrow roads deeper into Pine Valley County. The GPS signal flickered and died 20 miles from their destination, forcing Margaret to navigate by a hand-drawn map the lawyer had faxed to the library where she'd been using the internet. The landscape grew wilder with each mile. Rolling hills covered in sagebrush, stands of lodgepole pines, and rocky outcroppings that Margaret's trained eye automatically catalogued. Limestone, shale, occasional granite intrusions. Cedar Ridge announced itself with a bullet-riddled sign that read Population 1,200, with the 0 painted over what might have been a 5. The main street stretched for 6 blocks, lined with storefronts that seemed caught between abandonment and stubborn survival. The Cedar Ridge General Store and Post Office occupied a corner building, its windows cluttered with handwritten notices and faded advertisements. A diner called Martha's Kitchen showed signs of life, pickup trucks parked outside and warm light glowing through clean windows. The rest of the town felt like it was holding its breath. Margaret pulled up to the address the lawyer had provided, a small office squeezed between a hardware store and a vacant building that might have once been a bank. Thomas Patterson, attorney at law, according to the peeling letters on the door. She left Emma in the car, engine running for warmth, and climbed the narrow stairs to the second-floor office. Patterson turned out to be younger than his formal letters suggested, maybe mid-30s, with the tired eyes of someone maintaining a practice in a dying town. His office smelled of old paper and strong coffee. "Mrs. Hartwell," he greeted her, standing behind a desk covered in manila folders. "I honestly didn't expect you to come in person. Most people would have just signed the transfer documents by mail." "Most people probably have somewhere else to live," Margaret replied, too exhausted for pretense. His expression softened. "The court property. It's been sitting empty since 1979. Your great-uncle disappeared that summer, just vanished. No body ever found, no signs of foul play. After 7 years, he was declared legally dead, but the will was contested by some distant cousins. Took decades to sort through all the claims. You're the only direct descendant we could locate. I never even knew I had a great-uncle Samuel." Patterson shuffled through papers. He was something of a recluse. Moved here in the early 70s, bought the old Hendricks place out on Whispering Hills Road. Kept to himself mostly. Some folks say he was prospecting, others thought he was just paranoid. The Cold War made a lot of people strange. He handed her a manila envelope thick with documents. "The property includes the house, 15 acres, and mineral rights. Though I should warn you, dozens of surveys over the years have found nothing of value. The house itself." He hesitated. "Well, it needs work. Significant work. Define significant. It's been abandoned for over 40 years. No utilities connected. Structural damage from weather and time. Honestly, most people would tear it down and start fresh, but the land itself isn't worth the cost of demolition." Margaret thought of the $27 in her wallet. The repo man looking for her car, the eviction notice. "It has walls and a roof. Last I checked, yes. Then it's better than what we have now." Patterson's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained professional composure as he walked her through the paperwork. Within an hour, Margaret held the deed to 15 acres of Montana wilderness and a house that nobody wanted. The lawyer provided directions and a warning about the upcoming winter. "Snow starts early in the hills. If you're planning to stay, you'll need supplies." Back in the car, Margaret showed Emma the deed. "We own a house now. It needs some fixing up, but it's ours." Emma studied her mother's face with that unnerving perceptiveness. "Is it bad? Probably. But it's ours, and nobody can kick us out." The drive to Whispering Hills took them away from Cedar Ridge's modest civilization into increasingly wild country. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to dirt rutted by spring runoff and summer storms. Pine forests pressed close on either side, occasionally opening into meadows where deer raised their heads to watch them pass. Margaret's surveyor instincts noted the geological transitions, sedimentary layers giving way to older formations, signs of historical volcanic activity, unusual mineral striations in exposed rock faces. The mailbox, when they finally found, it was nearly swallowed by blackberry vines. The number 1547 was barely visible on its side, and the name Court had faded to a ghost of paint. The driveway was more suggestion than road, forcing Margaret to navigate carefully around washouts and fallen branches. Emma gripped the door handle, her book forgotten as they bounced and scraped their way up the winding approach. Then the trees opened, and there it was, The farmhouse squatted like a wounded animal against the hillside, its yellow paint peeled away to expose grey wood beneath. The front porch sagged dramatically on one side, where support posts had rotted through. Windows stared blindly, some broken, others boarded with plywood that had itself begun to deteriorate. The roof showed gaps where shingles had blown away, and a stone chimney listed at an alarming angle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Margaret's trained eye caught other details. The foundation was stone, not poured concrete, but carefully fitted fieldstone that had survived 4 decades of neglect. The house's bones were solid, built from old-growth timber that modern construction couldn't match. And the setting. The property stretched across a natural bowl in the hills, backed by a ridge of exposed rock that Margaret immediately recognized as unusual. The stratification was wrong. Layers that should have been horizontal showed signs of massive geological upheaval. Behind the house, barely visible through overgrown vegetation, stood the remains of a barn and what might have been other outbuildings. "It's horrible," Emma whispered. "It's home," Margaret corrected, forcing optimism she didn't feel. "We'll make it work." They parked near the house, and Margaret tested the front steps carefully before allowing Emma to follow. The door hung, askew on rusted hinges, secured with a padlock that had long since seized. Margaret used a tire iron from the car to pry it open, wincing at the shriek of protesting metal. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light, penetrating the gloom. The air smelled of rodents, decay, and something else, a mineral tang that made Margaret's surveyor instincts twitch. The front room stretched the width of the house, dominated by a fieldstone fireplace. Furniture draped in moldering sheets created ghostly shapes. Stairs near the back led to a second floor that Margaret decided to explore later after testing their stability. To the left, a dining room connected to a kitchen that might have been modern in 1950. An ancient refrigerator stood with its door ajar, revealing rusted shelves. The stove was a massive cast iron affair that probably predated the house's electrical system. Cabinets hung at odd angles, their contents long since claimed by mice and decay. But it was the kitchen's back wall that stopped Margaret cold. Where? There should have been a door to the outside. Someone had installed a steel security door, completely out of place in the rustic farmhouse. It was secured with multiple deadbolts and a modern electronic keypad that couldn't possibly work after 4 decades. "Mom?" Emma called from the front room. "There's another locked door over here." Margaret found her daughter standing before what should have been a closet door, except this too had been replaced with reinforced steel. Another keypad, long dead, guarded whatever lay beyond. "What do you think Uncle Samuel was hiding?" Emma asked. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out." They spent the rest of the day doing basic triage. Margaret identified which floorboards were sound, which windows could be temporarily sealed with plastic sheeting, and located the well pump house behind the kitchen. The pump was electric and useless without power, but an old hand pump stood beside it, rusty but functional after Margaret spent an hour coaxing it back to life with oil from the car and determination born of necessity. Water sputtered brown, then cleaner, then finally clear and cold. Margaret tested it with strips from her old field kit, a few tools she'd kept from her surveying days, and found it safe to drink. One essential need met. As the sun sank toward the ridge, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Margaret built a fire in the fireplace using wood from a pile they'd found under a tarp behind the house. She discovered camping gear in the car's trunk, remnants from happier times, when she and David had taken Emma on weekend adventures. The sleeping bags smelled musty but were intact. They ate dinner from cans, heated over the fire, beans and Vienna sausages that represented a significant portion of their remaining funds. Emma sat close to the flames, her face illuminated by dancing light, "Tell me about your job," she said suddenly. "The real one, before." Margaret paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "You know about my job. I was a surveyor for the state." "But what did you actually do?" "You never talked about it much." It was true. Margaret had always compartmentalized her work, partly from habit, geological. Surveys often involve proprietary information, and partly because she thought it would bore a child. But now, sitting in this strange house with its mysterious locked doors and their uncertain future stretching ahead, the past seemed safer territory. "I analyzed land for the state," she began, "looking for mineral deposits, checking geological stability for construction projects, assessing environmental impact. Montana's full of mining history, gold, silver, copper. My job was to map what's underground, understand how the earth formed in different places." "Like treasure hunting?" "Sometimes, though usually I was looking for more practical things. Water tables, fault lines, contamination from old mines. But occasionally," she smiled at the memory, "occasionally I'd find something unexpected. Rare minerals, unusual formations. Once I discovered a vein of rhodochrosite, this beautiful pink crystal, in a place nobody expected it." Emma's eyes reflected the firelight. "Did you keep any?" "A small piece. It's probably still in my desk at the office." The office she'd been locked out of 3 months ago. The thing about geology is that every landscape tells a story. The rocks remember everything that's happened. Ancient seas, volcanic eruptions, the movement of continents. You just have to know how to read them. "What story do these rocks tell?" Emma gestured toward the ridge visible through the broken window. Margaret studied the exposed strata in the fading light. "I'm not sure yet, but there's something unusual about this place. The geological formations don't match what I'd expect for this region. Tomorrow, when it's light, I'll take a closer look." They prepared for bed as darkness settled completely. Margaret had cleaned one corner of the front room, sweeping away the worst of the debris and mouse droppings. They laid their sleeping bags near the fireplace, using rolled-up clothes as pillows. The fire cast a protective circle of warmth and light. "Mum?" Emma's voice was small in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Margaret reached out and found her daughter's hand. "We're going to be fine. This is just temporary while we figure things out. The house needs work, but we've got shelter, water, and each other. That's more than some people have. I miss Dad." "I know, sweetheart, so do I." They lay in silence, listening to the pop of burning wood and the settling of the old house around them. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Margaret stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Through impossible calculations, their money would last perhaps a week. The car payment was overdue, insurance had lapsed, and she had no prospects for employment in a town of 100-200 people. But they had shelter, such as it was, and land. 15 acres that nobody wanted. Her thoughts drifted to the locked doors, the steel barriers that seemed so incongruous in the abandoned farmhouse. What had Samuel Court been protecting? Or perhaps more accurately, what had he been trying to keep contained? Eventually, exhaustion overtook anxiety. Margaret dozed fitfully, waking at every strange sound. The skitter of mice in the walls, the groan of old timbers, the distant crack of branches in the forest. Emma slept with the resilience of youth, curled in her sleeping bag like a caterpillar, in a cocoon. Sometime after midnight, Margaret woke to a sound that didn't fit the pattern of natural disturbances. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. The loose board near the door creaked in a rhythm that suggested weight shifting carefully, someone trying to move quietly. She lay perfectly still, one hand creeping toward the tire iron she'd kept close. The footsteps paused at the door, and she heard the soft scrape of metal on metal, someone testing the broken lock. Then, as suddenly as they'd come, the footsteps retreated. Margaret waited, counting her heartbeats, before carefully extracting herself from the sleeping bag. She crept to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. Moonlight illuminated the yard in silver and shadow. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then movement caught her eye. A figure near the tree line watching the house. Too far to make out details, but definitely human. As she watched, the figure turned and melted back into the forest. Margaret returned to her sleeping bag, the tire, iron now clutched in her hand. She didn't sleep again that night, her ears straining for any sound of return. But the darkness passed without further incident, and eventually the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. She must have dozed eventually because Emma's voice woke her. "Mom, someone's coming." Margaret bolted upright, immediately, alert. Through the window, she could see a pickup truck navigating the rutted driveway. It was old but well-maintained, with Cedar Ridge General Store painted on the door. The truck parked beside their Honda, and a woman emerged, 60-ish with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of weathered face that suggested a lifetime in the Montana mountains. She pulled a cardboard box from the truck, bed, and approached the house with the confident stride of someone who knew the terrain. Margaret met her at the door, tire iron hidden but within reach. The woman's eyes were sharp but kind. "You must be Margaret Hartwell. I'm Rosa Delgado. I run the general store in town. Thought you might need some supplies." Margaret relaxed slightly. "That's very kind, but we're on a tight budget, I imagine." Rosa's voice carried no judgment. "This isn't charity, just neighborly welcome. Besides, I owed Sam Court a favor from way back. Figure helping his kin squares the debt." Duquid handed over the box, which proved heavier than expected. Margaret glimpsed canned goods, bread, powdered milk, even fresh eggs nestled in cartons. "You knew my great-uncle?" Rosa's expression grew complex, part fondness, part something harder to identify. Everyone knew Sam, though few understood him. He was different, brilliant in his way. "Did you know he had a doctorate in mineralogy?" "Never mentioned it, but I saw his diploma once when I helped him clean out the barn." Margaret's pulse quickened. A mineralogist would explain her uncle's interest in this geological oddity of a property. The lawyer said people thought he was prospecting. People thought a lot of things about Sam Court. Rosa glanced at the house, her eyes lingering on the boarded windows. He spent his last years convinced he'd found something important. Got real secretive toward the end, installing those doors, ordering equipment from catalogs. Then, one day, in '79, he just vanished, left breakfast half-eaten on the table, coffee still warm in the cup. No one ever found out what happened. Oh, there were investigations. County sheriff, even some federal folk showed up asking questions, but nothing ever came of it. Place has been empty ever since. Most folks in town won't come near it. Why not? Rosa hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. Strange. Things happened here over the years. Lights in the hills at night, equipment malfunctions, compasses spinning, radios picking up odd frequencies. Sam claimed it was natural phenomena, something about the mineral content in the rocks. But after he disappeared, she shrugged. People prefer their mysteries at a distance. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices. Rosa's face immediately softened. "Well, hello there. You must be Emma. I've got something special for you." She returned to her truck and came back with a worn paperback book. "This was my daughter's favorite when she was your age. Thought you might enjoy it." Emma accepted the book shyly, and Margaret felt a twist of gratitude that brought tears dangerously close. It had been so long since anyone had shown them simple kindness. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." Rosa waved dismissively. Sam Court was the only person who'd buy my homemade preserves at full price, even when times were tough. Man had a weakness for blackberry jam. Her eyes grew distant with memory. Last time I saw him, he was excited about something, said he'd finally proved his theory, whatever that was. Next day he was gone. After Rosa left, with promises to check in again soon and directions to the nearest functioning electrical pole, in case you decide to get power hooked up, Margaret and Emma explored their new domain in daylight. The barn, which had looked like a total loss from a distance, proved sturdier than expected. The roof leaked and one wall had partially collapsed, but the frame was solid. Inside, they discovered tools, many showing signs of modification that suggested technical expertise. A workbench held equipment that seemed too sophisticated for a rural farmhouse. Mineral testing kits, what might have been a modified Geiger, a counter, and several devices Margaret couldn't immediately identify. Behind the barn, they found what Emma immediately dubbed the graveyard, a collection of mechanical and electronic equipment in various states of disassembly. Old computers, their guts exposed to the elements, survey equipment that would have been cutting edge in the 1970s. And strangest of all, a series of copper rods driven into the ground in a precise geometric pattern, connected by heavily insulated cables that led toward the house before disappearing underground. What was he doing? Emma asked, voicing the question that consumed Margaret's thoughts. I don't know, but he was definitely looking for something. They spent the morning cleaning and organizing, making the house marginally more livable. Margaret patched the worst window breaks with plastic sheeting and duct tape from the car. Emma swept floors and arranged their meager possessions. The work felt good, purposeful in a way Margaret hadn't experienced since losing her job. Around midday, she decided to investigate the ridge behind the property. Her surveyor's instincts had been nagging at her since their arrival. The exposed rock faces showed formations that shouldn't exist in this part of Montana. Metamorphic intrusions in what should have been purely sedimentary layers. Leaving Emma with strict instructions to stay in the house, Margaret hiked up the hillside. The property line extended well up the slope, marked by occasional wooden posts that had somehow survived 4 decades of weather. As she climbed, the geological anomalies became more pronounced. She found xenoliths, fragments of rock embedded in completely different stone, that suggested violent geological events. The mineral content was unusual too, with crystalline structures that caught the light in ways that made her fingers itch for her old testing equipment. Near the ridgetop, she discovered the first shaft. It was partially hidden by a deadfall, the opening reinforced with timber that bore tool marks. A mine entrance, but not like the historical gold or silver mines that dotted Montana's landscape. This was more recent, probably her great-uncle's work, and it descended at an angle that suggested he'd been following a specific geological feature. Margaret peered into the darkness, wishing for a flashlight. The air that flowed from the opening was cool and carried that same mineral tang she'd noticed in the house. Her trained nose detected something else, a subtle sweetness that reminded her of ozone after lightning strikes. She found 2 more shaft entrances as she traversed the ridge, each carefully positioned and reinforced. Sam Court had been mining, but not randomly. He'd been following something specific through the rock, something that had driven him to spend years in secretive excavation. The sun was beginning its afternoon descent when Margaret decided to return to the house. As she picked her way down, the slope movement in the valley caught her eye. A vehicle was approaching on the access road, not Rosa's familiar pickup, but a black SUV with government plates. Margaret's stomach clenched. She quickened her pace, half sliding down loose scree, in her haste to reach the house before the visitors. By the time she burst through the back door, the SUV was parking beside their Honda. Emma looked up from the book Rosa had given her, immediately reading her mother's tension. "Who is it?" "I don't know. Stay inside." 2 figures emerged from the SUV, a woman in a crisp business suit in Congress in the rural setting, and a man in military fatigues with no visible rank insignia. They approached the house with the measured confidence of people accustomed to authority. Margaret met them on the porch, acutely aware of her dirt-stained clothes and the day's sweat from hiking and cleaning. The woman spoke first, her smile professional but not warm. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Dr. Patricia Webb with the Department of Energy. This is Sergeant Collins. We understand you've recently inherited this property." "News travels fast in small towns," Margaret replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Indeed, we're here because this property has some historical significance to our department. Your great-uncle was involved in some research that overlapped with federal interests. We'd like to discuss the possibility of the government purchasing the land from you." Margaret felt Emma come to stand beside her, a small hand slipping into hers. "I'm not interested in selling. We just arrived yesterday." Dr. Webb's smile never wavered. "Of course, you'll want to assess the property first. However, I should mention that our offer would be generous, enough to relocate comfortably anywhere you choose." "How generous?" $750,000. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. $750,000 for 15 acres of scrubland that nobody had wanted for 40 years. Every instinct screamed that something was very wrong. "That's unexpected," she managed. "The historical value," Dr. Webb explained smoothly. "And frankly, the department would rather own the land outright than deal with potential complications. And down the line, your great-uncle's research touched on some sensitive areas." "What kind of research exactly?" The smile finally faltered slightly. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics. National security considerations, you understand. But I can assure you, our interest is purely historical. We simply want to ensure that any materials or documentation left behind are properly archived." Margaret thought of the locked steel doors, the mysterious equipment, the mine shafts following geological features that shouldn't exist. "I need time to consider your offer." "Of course, take all the time you need." Dr. Webb produced a business card. "When you're ready to discuss terms, please call this number. We're staying at the Mountain View Motel in Cedar Ridge for the next few days." As they turned to leave, Sergeant Collins spoke for the first time. "Ma'am, you might want to be careful exploring the property. Old mine shafts can be dangerous, unstable, accidents happen." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Margaret watched their SUV disappear down the drive, her mind racing. $750,000 would solve every problem, provide security for Emma, and offer a fresh start anywhere they wanted. It was more money than she'd see in a lifetime of work. So why did the offer feel like a trap? That evening, as they ate dinner from Rosa's supplies, canned stew, supplemented with fresh bread, Emma asked the question Margaret had been avoiding. "Why did you say no to the money?" Margaret set down her spoon, considering her answer. "Because when someone offers you 30 times what something is worth, it means it's worth even more than that to them. And I want to know why. But we need money. We need answers more. Your great-great-uncle spent years of his life here, looking for something important enough that the government is still interested 40 years after he disappeared. Don't you want to know what it was?" Emma nodded slowly. "The locked doors. They're connected, aren't they?" "I think so. Tomorrow. We're going to town to see if anyone knows how to open them." That night, Margaret's dreams were filled with spinning compasses and lights dancing across the ridge. She woke several times, checking the windows, but saw only darkness and stars. Whatever had brought that nocturnal visitor the first night seemed to be waiting, watching. The next morning brought low clouds and the threat of rain. Margaret and Emma drove into Cedar Ridge, partly to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house and partly to gather information. Their first stop was the library, a small building that shared space with the town hall. The librarian, Helen Vance, was younger than Margaret expected, perhaps early 40s, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked up from her computer as they entered, and her expression shifted from polite welcome to something more complex when Margaret introduced herself. "Hartwell, you're Sam Court's great niece." It wasn't a question. News really does travel fast here. In a town this size, a new face is major news. Besides, I had a call this morning asking about you. Federal people wanting to know if you'd been in to research your uncle. Margaret felt her pulse quicken. "And have I?" Helen's smile was conspiratorial. "Not yet, but I have a feeling you're about to. Sam Court section is in the back room, local history. Though I should warn you, some of the more interesting materials aren't in the public collection." She led them to a small room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of bound newspapers. A table dominated the center, and Helen pulled several boxes from a locked cabinet. "Sam donated these to the library about a month before he disappeared. Said they were for insurance. I was just a kid then, helping my mother who was librarian before me. She never catalogued them officially, said Sam asked her to keep them private until the right person came looking." "And you think I'm the right person? You didn't take the federal offer, did you?" At Margaret's surprised look, Helen chuckled. Dr. Webb had breakfast at Martha's Diner. In a town this size, everyone knows everyone's business by lunch. So yes, I think you might be who Sam was waiting for. The boxes contained journals, maps, technical documents, and what appeared to be core samples, cylindrical sections of rock carefully labeled with depth measurements and GPS coordinates. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the first journal. Her great-uncle's handwriting was precise, methodical. The entries began in 1974 with his arrival in Cedar Ridge and his purchase of the property. He'd been drawn by geological survey reports suggesting unusual magnetic anomalies in the Whispering Hills region. His early entries detailed standard prospecting activities, looking for gold, silver, or other valuable minerals. But by 1976, the tone had changed. He discovered something that defied conventional geology, formations that suggested the presence of an unknown mineral compound. His excitement was palpable even through the clinical language of his notes. Margaret skimmed forward, her trained eye catching technical details that made her pulse race, piezoelectric properties far exceeding known materials, crystalline structures that seemed to shift under observation, energy readings that violated established physics. "Mom, look at this." Emma had been examining a separate box and now held up a photograph. It showed Samuel Court standing beside one of the mine entrances, grinning and holding what appeared to be a glowing rock. The image quality was poor, but the stone in his hands seemed to emit its own light. Margaret took the photo with trembling, fingers written on the back in her uncle's hand. "First successful extraction, May 15th, 1979. The old-timers' stories were true. Now to understand what we've really found." "He discovered something," she breathed, "something that shouldn't exist." Helen had been watching quietly. Now she leaned forward. "There have always been stories about Whispering Hills, Native American, legends about stones that sang and lights that danced on the ridge. The early settlers avoided the area, said it made them feel strange, dizzy. Sam was the first person to investigate seriously. And the government knew? They started showing up about 6 months before Sam disappeared. Different agencies, always with different cover stories. Mining safety inspections, environmental assessments, historical surveys. Sam got increasingly paranoid. That's when he installed those security doors in the house. Margaret turned pages in the journal, finding increasingly frantic entries about surveillance, intercepted mail, and tapped phone lines. The final entry was dated July 17th, 1979. "They know what I've found. Samples sent to Martin at MIT confirmed. Completely unknown crystalline structure with properties that challenge fundamental physics. Energy output measurements off the charts. This could revolutionize everything, but they want to weaponize it. I won't let that happen. If something happens to me, everything is secured in the deep chamber. Only family can access. Biometric. Lock-keyed to court DNA. The truth has to come out, but at the right time, in the right way. Margaret looked up to find Helen watching her intently. The doors in the house, they're biometric? That would explain why the feds never got in. They've had people out there over the years, always with some excuse. But if Sam keyed the AE locks to family DNA, then only I can open them. The implications hit Margaret like a physical blow. Her great-uncle hadn't just discovered a new mineral, he'd found something that threatened established science, something valuable enough that the government had potentially murdered him to keep it secret. And now, 45 years later, she had inherited not just a rundown farmhouse, but potentially one of the most significant scientific discoveries in human history. "What are you going to do?" Helen asked softly. Margaret thought of the federal offer, of the veiled threat in Sergeant Collins's warning about unstable mine shafts, of Emma's future. Then she thought of her great-uncle, brilliant and paranoid, trying to protect something he believed could change the world. "I'm going to finish what he started," she said finally. "But first, I need to open those doors." Margaret's hands trembled as she carefully packed the journals and documents back into their boxes. The weight of her great-uncle's discovery pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Emma stood beside her, unusually quiet, sensing the gravity of what they'd uncovered. "Can we take these with us?" Margaret asked Helen. The librarian nodded slowly. "Sam specifically stated they were for family, though I'd suggest making copies. First, things have a way of disappearing when federal agencies get involved." They spent the next hour at the library's ancient photocopier, duplicating the most crucial pages. Helen helped, her movements efficient and practiced, as if she'd been waiting decades for this moment. When they finished, she produced a large canvas bag from behind her desk. "For the originals," she explained, "and there's something else." She disappeared into a back room, returning with a small metal box. "Sam left this separately, said it was for when the time comes. I think that time is now." Inside the box was a single key and a folded piece of paper. Margaret unfolded it carefully, recognizing her uncle's handwriting. "The biometric locks need initialization. Main panel is behind the kitchen door. Key accesses manual override. Place palm on scanner, hold for 30 seconds. System will map genetic markers. After that, only court family DNA will work. If you're reading this, you know why I had to protect it. The world isn't ready, but someday it will be. Guard it well." Margaret pocketed the key, her mind racing. "Helen, has anyone else ever asked about these materials?" Every few years, someone shows up, usually claiming to be a historian or writing a book about Montana mining history. I tell them we have newspaper clippings about Sam's disappearance, nothing more. Her eyes hardened. "I was 12 when Sam vanished. He used to teach me about rocks and minerals, let me help organize his samples. He was a good man who stumbled onto something extraordinary. I've been protecting his legacy ever since." They left the library with the canvas bag of documents and a deeper understanding of what they faced. As they drove back through Cedar Ridge, Margaret noticed the black SUV parked outside Martha's diner. Through the window, she could see Dr. Webb and Sergeant Collins at a corner booth, deep in conversation. "They're still here," Emma observed. "They're not going anywhere until they get what they want," Margaret replied, "or until they realize they can't have it." The road back to Whispering Hills seemed longer than before, each curve bringing them closer to a confrontation with secrets that had waited 45 years to be revealed. The sky had darkened further, and the first drops of rain spattered the windshield as they turned onto their property. Margaret parked close to the house and they rushed inside just as the clouds opened in earnest. Rain drummed on the compromised roof, creating a symphony of drips and leaks throughout the house. Margaret quickly positioned pots and buckets under the worst spots, grateful they'd covered their sleeping area with a tarp the night before. While Emma organized their supplies in a dry corner, Margaret approached the steel door in the kitchen. The electronic keypad was dark and unresponsive, but beside it, previously unnoticed, was a small keyhole. She inserted Sam's key and turned it slowly. There was a soft click, and a panel she hadn't seen before slid open, revealing a palm scanner that looked impossibly modern for technology from the 1970s. The screen flickered to life, displaying a simple message: "System offline, initialize." Margaret pressed her palm against the scanner. The surface was cool and smooth, and for a moment nothing happened. Then she felt a slight warmth, a tingling sensation that traveled up her arm. The screen began displaying rapidly scrolling data. Genetic sequences, she realized. Her uncle hadn't just installed high-tech locks, he'd created a genetic recognition system decades ahead of its time. After exactly 30 seconds, the scanner beeped softly. Genetic profile recorded. Margaret Eleanor Hartwell. Access granted. System online. The heavy steel door unlocked with a deep mechanical thunk. Margaret grasped the handle, her heart pounding, and pulled it open. Beyond was not the basement. She'd expected but a steel-lined staircase descending into darkness. Motion sensors activated as she stepped through, illuminating the passage with soft LED lighting. The air that flowed up was cool and dry, with that distinctive mineral scent she'd noticed throughout the property. "Emma, stay here," she called back, but her daughter was already at her side. "We're in this together, Mom. Whatever great Uncle Sam was hiding, it's ours now." Margaret couldn't argue with that logic. Together, they descended into Samuel Court's secret laboratory. The staircase led to a corridor carved from solid rock, its walls smooth and precisely cut. More lights activated as they walked, revealing a series of rooms branching off the main passage. The first was clearly a laboratory, workbenches lined with equipment that looked like it belonged in a university research facility, not a rural Montana basement. But it was the second room that took their breath away. The space opened into a natural cavern that had been carefully modified. The walls sparkled with embedded crystals that caught and refracted the artificial light into rainbow patterns. In the center of the room stood a clear containment unit, and inside it... "It's beautiful," Emma whispered. The crystal was roughly the size of a basketball, multifaceted and absolutely clear, except for its core, which pulsed with a soft blue-white light. The illumination wasn't constant but rhythmic, like a heartbeat, and it seemed to respond to their presence, glowing brighter as they approached. Margaret circled the containment unit, her scientific training warring with sheer wonder. The crystal defied every principle of mineralogy she knew. No natural formation could produce its own light. Not like this. And the energy readings displayed on nearby monitors showed output levels that shouldn't be possible from an object this size. A journal lay open on a nearby workbench. Sam's final entries, written in this very room, July 16, 1979. Primary specimens successfully extracted from depth of 400 feet. The native legends were accurate. The stones do sing. Frequency analysis shows patterns that suggest artificial origin. This isn't natural formation. Someone or something created this. Energy output increases exponentially when multiple specimens are present. 3 small samples produced enough power to run entire lab complex for a week. Implications staggering. Clean, unlimited energy source, but also dangerous. The resonance patterns could be weaponized. They're watching now. Cars on the road that turn back before reaching the property. Helicopters that circle but never land. Phone calls with nothing but breathing. They know what I've found. I've prepared everything. Secondary specimens secured. In deep storage, research data encrypted and hidden. If something happens to me, if they try to take this by force, the system will lock down. Only family can access. Only those who share my blood can decide what happens next. To whoever reads this, you have a choice. This discovery could save the world or destroy it. Choose wisely. Margaret sank onto a lab stool, overwhelmed. Her great-uncle hadn't just found a new mineral. He'd discovered what appeared to be evidence of advanced technology. Possibly not of this world. The implications were staggering. "Mom, look at this." Emma had wandered to another section of the lab where smaller crystal samples were displayed in individual cases. Each glowed with the same inner light, but in different colors: deep purple, brilliant green, warm amber. Labels indicated where each had been extracted, creating a three-dimensional map of a vast deposit beneath the property. A computer terminal nearby still functioned, powered by some independent system. Margaret activated it, finding terabytes of research data, spectrographic analyses, energy conversion experiments, theoretical physics calculations that pushed the boundaries of known science. Her uncle had spent years documenting every aspect of his discovery. One file caught her attention: resonance communication attempts. She opened it to find records of experiments where Sam had subjected the crystals to various frequencies, trying to understand their properties. The final entry was chilling. The primary specimen responded to encoded mathematical sequences. When I transmitted prime numbers, it repeated them back with variations. This isn't just a power source. It's a communication device. Something is listening. Something is responding. I've stopped the experiments. We're not ready for this level of contact. A sound from above interrupted her reading. Footsteps on the floor above, too heavy to be wind or settling wood. Margaret grabbed Emma's hand, pulling her back toward the stairs. But before they could reach the corridor, they heard the steel door above slam shut. They were trapped. Margaret fought panic as she raced up the stairs. The door wouldn't budge, and the palm scanner on this side remained dark and unresponsive. She pounded on the steel, shouting, but the sound was muffled, absorbed by the heavy construction. "Mom, what's happening?" Emma's voice was small, scared. "Someone's in the house. They've locked us in." Margaret pulled out her cell phone. No signal, of course. They were too deep underground, surrounded by too much rock and metal. She forced herself to think clearly. Sam had been paranoid, prepared. There had to be another exit, an emergency escape route. They returned to the main lab, and Margaret began systematically searching for hidden panels, secondary doors, anything that might offer escape. It was Emma who found it, a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped. Margaret discovered the concealed catch, and a panel slid aside to reveal a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. "Emergency exit to mine shaft 3, read a small placard. "One-way passage, cannot be opened from outside." They had no choice. Margaret grabbed a flashlight from the lab supplies, took Emma's hand, and entered the tunnel. It was carved from living rock, narrow enough that Margaret had to duck in places. The air grew colder as they progressed, and she could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged into a larger space, one of the mine shafts Margaret had discovered. On the ridge, rain still fell outside, visible through the entrance, and the grey afternoon light seemed brilliant after the tunnel's darkness. They climbed out onto the hillside, both soaked within seconds. Margaret oriented herself quickly. They were about a quarter-mile from the house, hidden from view by a stand of pine trees. Through the rain, she could see vehicles in the yard. Not just the government SUV, but 2 unmarked vans and several figures in tactical gear. "Stay low," she whispered to Emma. They crept through the trees, circling toward the barn where their car was parked. But as they neared the edge of the woods, Margaret's heart sank. Their Honda was blocked in by the vans, and agents were stationed around the perimeter. They retreated deeper into the forest. Margaret's mind raced through options, all of them bad. They were miles from town, in worsening weather, with no vehicle and no way to call for help. And somewhere beneath their feet lay a discovery that could change the world, now in the hands of people who had potentially murdered her uncle to keep it secret. "There's someone coming," Emma whispered, pointing through the trees. A figure approached through the rain, moving carefully but deliberately in their direction. Margaret pushed Emma behind her, gripping a fallen branch as a makeshift weapon. But as the figure drew closer, she recognized the yellow raincoat. Rosa Delgado, from the general store. "Thought I might find you up here," Rosa said quietly, pushing back her hood. "Saw the government vehicles racing through town. Figured you might need some help." "How did you know where?" "Sam showed me the emergency exits years ago. Said, if anything ever happened, if the wrong people came calling, to check the old mine shafts." She glanced toward the house where flashlight beams cut through the gathering darkness. "Looks like the wrong people finally came." Rosa led them to a small hunting shelter deeper in the woods, just a rough lean-to, but dry and hidden. She produced a thermos of hot coffee and blankets from a pack she'd been carrying. "We need to get to town," Margaret said, wrapping a blanket around Emma. "Contact someone, the media maybe, or—" "Won't work," Rosa interrupted. "They'll have the roads blocked, phones monitored. This isn't their first rodeo. When Sam disappeared, it was the same. Town locked down tight until they finished their business." "So what do we do?" Rosa smiled grimly. "We wait, and then we fight back. Sam always said this day would come. He prepared more than just that lab, Margaret. There's a network, people who believed him, who've been waiting. I've already sent word." "What kind of network?" "Scientists, journalists, even some folks in government who think the public has a right to know. Sam spent years building connections, sharing just enough information to convince the right people. They know if Whispering Hills goes dark. If the feds suddenly lock down a nowhere town in Montana, it means someone finally accessed Sam's discovery." Margaret thought of the crystal pulsing with impossible light, the energy readings that defied physics, the suggestion of communication with something beyond Earth. "It's real, Rosa. Everything Sam found. It's all real." "I know, honey. He showed me once. Just a small sample. Changed everything I thought I knew about the world." Rosa pulled out an old satellite phone from her pack. "This operates on a special frequency, one they can't jam easily. Give it an hour for the word to spread, then we make some calls." They huddled in the shelter as darkness fell completely. The rain continued, covering any sounds of their presence. Through the trees, they could see lights moving around the house and occasional vehicle traffic on the access road. Emma dozed fitfully against Margaret's shoulder while the adults took turns keeping watch. "Tell me about the network," Margaret said during her watch shift. Rosa sipped coffee from the thermos lid. "Sam was careful. He knew if he published his findings openly, they'd be discredited, buried, or worse. So he chose people carefully. A physicist at Stanford, a journalist, at the Washington Post, a senator on the Intelligence Committee. He gave each just enough proof to make them believe, then asked them to wait. Wait for what? For exactly this. For someone in the family to inherit, to make the choice he couldn't, whether to reveal everything or keep it buried. He believed it had to be a clean break, someone not already compromised by government connections or corporate interests." Margaret thought about her life. A state employee laid off in budget cuts, a widow struggling to survive, someone with absolutely nothing to lose. "So I'm the perfect candidate. You're also trained in geology, able to understand what he found. That's not coincidence, Margaret. Sam tracked his family carefully. He knew about you, your education, your work. He chose you. The idea that her great-uncle had orchestrated this from beyond the grave was disturbing and oddly comforting. She wasn't random. She was selected, prepared, without knowing it for this moment. When the hour passed, Rosa powered up the satellite phone and began making calls. The conversations were brief, coded, but Margaret caught enough to understand. Photos of government vehicles at the property were already circulating online. Questions were being asked in Washington. Journalists were booking flights to Montana. "They've got maybe 12 hours before this becomes public," Rosa said with satisfaction. "After that, too many eyes watching for them to just make you disappear like Sam." "What about what's in the lab? They'll have accessed it by now." "Will." "They? You said it needed family DNA. Unless they brought a genetic expert and sophisticated equipment, that door's staying locked. They're probably tearing the house apart looking for override codes that don't exist." Margaret felt a surge of hope. The main lab might still be secure, but then she remembered the emergency exit, the one-way passage. If they followed it back? As if reading her thoughts, Rosa shook her head. Sam was thorough. That tunnel has acoustic sensors. Any unauthorized entry triggers a lockdown. Solid steel barriers drop at 100-foot intervals. They'd need mining equipment to dig through. The night wore on. Around midnight, Emma woke, hungry and cold despite the blankets. Rosa produced energy bars and more coffee from her seemingly bottomless pack. They took turns sleeping, always keeping one person on watch. Dawn broke grey and misty, the rain finally tapering to drizzle. Through the trees, they could see the government presence had doubled overnight. A communications truck had joined the vehicles, its satellite dish prominent against the sky. Workers in hazmat suits carried equipment in and out of the house. "They're scared," Rosa observed. "Don't know what they're dealing with, worried about radiation or contamination. Good. Means they haven't figured out what Sam really found." Margaret's phone, which had been dead all night, suddenly buzzed with incoming messages. They were back in cell range, and the world was waking up to the story. Helen from the library had released scanned copies of Sam's journals to multiple news outlets. The senator Rosa had contacted was demanding answers about a black operation in Montana. Social media was exploding with theories about what the government was hiding in Whispering Hills. "Time to make our move," Rosa announced. She handed Margaret a business card. "Marissa Chen, investigative journalist. She's been following this story for 20 years, ever since her mentor at the Post got those documents from Sam. She's flying in this morning, landing at the county airstrip about 10 miles north. We need to get you to her." "How?" "They'll have the roads watched." Rosa grinned. "Sam wasn't the only one who knew these hills. There's an old logging road that connects to the county highway. Rough going, but my truck can handle it. We leave now, while they're focused on the house." They packed quickly, Margaret taking only the most essential items, the copies of Sam's journals, the original key, and her own documentation of what they'd found in the lab. Rosa led them on a circuitous route through the forest, avoiding the areas where government agents might have posted lookouts. The truck was hidden under a camouflaged tarp near an abandoned logging camp. It was old, but well-maintained, with four-wheel drive and reinforced suspension. They piled in, Emma wedged between the adults, and Rosa navigated carefully through overgrown trails that barely qualified as roads. Twice they had to stop, once to winch the truck over a fallen tree, once to wait while a military helicopter passed overhead. But after 2 hours of bone-jarring travel, they emerged onto a paved county road, miles from the main approach to Cedar Ridge. The airstrip was little more than a cleared field with a small terminal building. A private jet was just taxiing to a stop as they arrived. The woman who emerged looked nothing like Margaret's idea of a hard-hitting journalist. Petite, elegantly dressed, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a precise bun. But her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail as she approached. Margaret Hartwell? She extended a manicured hand. Marissa Chen. I've been waiting a long time to meet someone from Samuel Court's family. I believe you have quite a story to tell. Within minutes, they were aboard the plane, a chartered jet belonging to the media consortium Marissa represented. As they lifted off, Margaret could see the full scope of the government operation below. The house surrounded by vehicles, helicopters circling the ridge, roadblocks on every approach to the property. "They're too late," Marissa said, following. Her gaze. "The story's already out. 3 major networks are running with it, and the internet is on fire. The question now is how we frame the narrative. What exactly did your uncle find, Margaret?" Over the next hour, as the plane flew toward a secure location where they could plan their next moves, Margaret told everything. The crystal that produced its own light, the energy readings that defied physics, the suggestion of communication with something beyond Earth. She showed the copied journals, the photographs, her own observations from the brief time in the lab. Marissa listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Margaret finished, the journalist sat back with an expression of wonder mixed with calculation. This is bigger than anyone imagined. Not just a new energy source or unknown mineral, potential proof of non-human intelligence. The government's had 45 years to study this, to prepare. The question is, why reveal it now? Maybe they don't have a choice, Margaret suggested. If the crystals are trying to communicate, if something really is responding to them, perhaps we've reached a point where secrecy is no longer possible. Marissa nodded thoughtfully. Or perhaps they need something only you can provide. Full access to your uncle's lab, the primary specimen he protected. They can't simply take it by force anymore, not with the world watching. They'll have to negotiate. The plane banked gently, beginning its descent. Through the window, Margaret could see mountains giving way to plains, a city sprawling in the distance. Somewhere behind them, her inherited property swarmed with government agents trying to unlock secrets that had waited decades for this moment. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, speaking for the first time since they'd boarded. "Somewhere safe," Marissa assured her. "A place where we can tell your mother's story properly with full protection. The consortium I represent has resources, lawyers, security. What happens next will happen on our terms, not theirs." Margaret held her daughter close, feeling the weight of destiny settling around them. Her great-uncle had preserved something extraordinary, something that could reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Now it fell to her to decide how that knowledge would be shared. The crystal pulsed in her memory, its light calling across impossible distances to something that listened among the stars. Whatever came next, Margaret knew their lives would never be the same. The simple woman who had inherited a worthless farmhouse was gone, replaced by the guardian of perhaps the most significant discovery in human history. As the plane descended, toward an uncertain but extraordinary future, she made a silent promise to the great-uncle she'd never met. His secret would not die in darkness. The world would know the truth, whatever the cost. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling ranch complex outside Denver, owned by the media consortium and protected by private security. As their small plane touched down on a private airstrip, Margaret could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter and security cameras, tracking their arrival. The contrast with the ramshackle farmhouse in Montana was stark. Emma pressed her face against the window, taking in the manicured grounds and modern buildings. "Are we prisoners now?" she asked with a child's directness. "Protected guests," Marissa corrected gently. "There's a significant difference. You're free to leave whenever you choose, though I wouldn't recommend it just yet. The government will be looking for leverage, and you two are their best option." They were escorted to a guest house that felt more like a luxury hotel suite. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and a living room with panoramic windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. After days of sleeping on floors and hiding in the woods, it seemed almost surreal. While Emma explored their new temporary home, Marissa set up a command center in the living room. Laptops, secure phones, and recording equipment appeared as if by magic, carried in by efficient assistants who spoke in low voices and moved with practiced discretion. "First things first," Marissa said, settling into a chair across from Margaret. "We need your full statement on record, everything you saw, everything you found. The public is clamoring for details, and controlling the narrative is crucial." For the next 3 hours, Margaret recounted her story in exhaustive detail. The inheritance, the discovery of the lab, the crystal that defied known physics. Marissa's questions were precise, probing, designed to extract every possible detail. When they finished, Margaret felt drained but oddly relieved. The burden of secret knowledge was now shared. "The response has been extraordinary," Marissa said, scrolling through her tablet. "Your story is trending globally. Scientists are demanding access to verify your claims. Religious groups are calling it everything from divine revelation to satanic deception. And the government..." She paused, selecting her words carefully. "They've scheduled a press conference for this evening. The Department of Energy specifically." Margaret's stomach tightened. "Dr. Webb, among others, they're bringing out the heavy artillery, physicists, military advisors, even a representative from the State Department. Whatever they're planning to say, they're taking it seriously." They watched the press conference on multiple screens, surrounded by Marissa's team of analysts and experts. Dr. Webb appeared composed but tense, flanked by officials whose titles occupied half the screen in tiny print. The prepared statement was masterfully crafted, acknowledging just enough to seem transparent while revealing almost nothing. "The Department of Energy can confirm that the property in Cedar Ridge, Montana, was used for classified research during the Cold War period." Dr. Webb read, "Recent inheritance transfer prompted a routine historical assessment of the site. While some unusual mineral deposits were documented in historical records, current investigations have found no evidence of active energy sources or communication devices as claimed in recent media reports." The press corps erupted with questions. Dr. Webb fielded them with practiced ease, dismissing Margaret's claims as misinterpretations of old equipment and natural phenomena. Stress-induced hallucinations were mentioned. The power of suggestion when reading historical documents was emphasized. "They're calling you crazy," Emma said bluntly, curled beside Margaret on the couch. "They're trying to," Margaret agreed. "But we have proof." Marissa was already on the phone, orchestrating their response. Within an hour, excerpts from Sam's journals were released online, accompanied by his photographs of the glowing crystals. Independent experts began analyzing the technical data, confirming that the energy readings described were theoretically impossible with known materials. The battle for public opinion had begun. That night, as Emma slept in her first real bed, in days, Margaret stood at the window watching distant lights twinkle across the Colorado plains. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Rosa Delgado entered, having arrived on a later flight with additional documents from the library. "Thought you might need a familiar face," Rosa said, joining her at the window. "This must all feel pretty overwhelming." "Understatement of the century," Margaret replied. "A week ago I was homeless. Now I'm apparently the keeper of humanity's first contact with... what? Aliens, other dimensions. I don't even know what to call it." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Sam struggled with the same questions. He wrote me once that discovering the crystals was like a medieval farmer finding a smartphone. You know it's significant, know it's technology, but the gap between what you understand and what you're seeing is so vast, it might as well be magic." "How long have you known? Really known?" since about a month before he disappeared. He was scared, Margaret, not of the discovery itself, but of what people would do with it. He'd already had offers, defense contractors, energy companies, foreign governments. Everyone wanted a piece of it. But he said no. He said no, Rosa confirmed. And they didn't like that answer. The last time I saw him, he gave me an envelope. Said to keep it safe, only open it if something happened to him. She pulled a yellowed envelope from her bag. I've been carrying it ever since, waiting for the right moment. I think that moment is now. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Sam's careful handwriting, and a small glass vial containing what looked like crystalline sand that glowed faintly in the dim light. Secondary sample from the deep deposit, the note read. Resonance frequency 432 Hz. If primary specimens are compromised, this can re-establish connection. The network extends far beyond Earth. We are not alone, and they have been waiting. The crystal choir must sing again. Trust in wonder, not fear. Samuel. Margaret held the vial up to the light, watching the tiny crystals pulse with their own inner rhythm. Even this small sample radiated an energy she could feel in her bones, a vibration that seemed to resonate with something fundamental in the universe. There's something else, Rosa said quietly. The lights people have been seeing in the hills since you arrived? They're not government surveillance. I've lived here all my life. Those lights have been appearing for generations. The Native Americans called this place the Singing Hills long before settlers arrived. Sam didn't discover something new, Margaret. He rediscovered something ancient. The implications were staggering. Margaret thought of the primary crystal locked in her uncle's lab, pulsing its message into space. How long had it been there? Who had placed it? And perhaps most importantly, what was it trying to say? The next morning brought a storm of activity. Marissa had arranged for a team of independent scientists to analyze the crystal sample, including a Nobel laureate physicist who had flown in overnight. They worked in a hastily assembled lab in one of the ranch's outbuildings, their excitement palpable even through the security glass. It's impossible, Dr. James Huang kept muttering as he studied the readings. The energy density alone violates everything we know about crystalline structures and the quantum signatures. He trailed off, lost in calculations that filled multiple whiteboards. Margaret watched the scientists work, feeling like she was witnessing history. Emma sat beside her, sketching in a notebook. She'd taken to drawing constantly since their arrival, her pictures filled with geometric patterns that seemed to echo the crystal structure. "Mom, do you hear that?" Emma asked suddenly. Margaret listened but heard only the hum of equipment and the scientists' low discussions. "Hear what, sweetie?" "The singing. It's quiet, but it's there, like when you put a seashell to your ear, but different." Dr. Huang overheard and immediately attached sensors to Emma's head with Margaret's permission. The readings made him freeze. She's showing resonance patterns that match the crystal's frequency. How is that possible? Before Margaret could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the complex. Security personnel rushed past their windows, and Marissa burst through the door with a tablet in hand. "Government forces are mobilizing," she announced. "Satellite imagery shows convoys approaching from 3 directions. They're coming for you, Margaret, for the sample." "They can't just raid a private facility," Margaret protested. "They're not calling it a raid. There's a federal judge who just signed a warrant claiming the crystal sample represents a potential biological hazard. CDC personnel are en route with military escort." Marissa's expression was grim. "We have maybe 30 minutes before they arrive." The next few minutes were controlled chaos. The scientists frantically documented their findings while security prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Margaret faced an impossible choice: surrender the sample and lose their only physical evidence, or resist and risk arrest. There's another option, Dr. Huang said suddenly. The resonance patterns we've documented, they're not random. It's a complex mathematical sequence, possibly a form of communication. If we can amplify the signal, broadcast it widely enough. You want to answer the message? Margaret asked. The crystals under your property have been transmitting for who knows how long, but this sample, when subjected to specific frequencies, produces a different pattern, almost like a key or an activation code. Margaret looked at the tiny vial of glowing sand, then at Emma, who was still drawing her strange patterns. The weight of choice pressed down on her, not just for herself or her daughter, but potentially for all of humanity. Do it, she decided. Whatever this is, wherever it came from, hiding it hasn't worked. The government's kept it secret for 45 years, and what has that accomplished? Maybe it's time to try something else. Dr. Huang and his team worked with desperate efficiency, configuring their equipment to amplify the crystal's resonance. They had just begun the sequence when the first government vehicles appeared on the horizon, dark shapes moving fast across the Colorado plains. Whatever you're going to do it now, Marissa urged, watching the approaching convoys through binoculars. Dr. Huang initiated the amplification sequence. The tiny crystal sample began to pulse brighter, its internal light synchronized with the transmitted frequencies. Equipment throughout the lab began to resonate, creating an otherworldly harmony that Margaret felt in her chest. Emma suddenly gasped, her eyes wide. "Mom, look at the sky!" Through the windows they could see the afternoon sky beginning to shimmer like heat distortion, but more structured, more purposeful. Clouds seemed to part in perfect geometric patterns, and for a moment Margaret could swear she saw something beyond. Vast structures of light and mathematics, a glimpse of architecture that existed outside normal space. Then the power went out. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but the transmission had been interrupted. Outside, government vehicles were pouring through the gates, agents in tactical gear deploying across the grounds. The security team stood down. Everyone. New resistance would only lead to bloodshed. Within minutes, the lab was surrounded. Dr. Webb entered with a phalanx of officials, her professional mask finally cracked to show genuine fear. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, staring at the now dim crystal sample. "That transmission? Do you understand what you might have triggered? Enlighten us," Margaret challenged, pulling Emma protectively close. "Operation Lone Signal," Webb said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Classified above top secret. Your uncle's discovery was just one node in a global network. We've detected similar deposits in Siberia, the Andes, beneath the Sahara. All dormant until now, all waiting for an activation signal." The implications hit Margaret like a physical blow. "You mean, for 45 years, we've managed to keep them quiet, contained. Your uncle almost activated the network in 1979. That's why he had to be stopped. And now you've..." Webb stopped, her face pale as data streamed across her tablet. Oh God. They're all responding. Every site simultaneously. Through the lab windows, the sky continued to shift and shimmer. The aurora-like displays were spreading, visible now even in broad daylight. Emma's strange drawings suddenly made sense. She'd been sketching what the crystals were trying to show them, patterns and structures that existed beyond normal perception. "What happens now?" Margaret asked, though she suspected no one truly knew the answer. Dr. Webb looked at her with a mixture of accusation and desperate hope. "Now we find out if your uncle was right to trust in wonder instead of fear. The activation can't be stopped. Whatever placed these crystals on Earth is about to make contact. Full contact." The government team quickly shifted from enforcement to crisis management. Secure communication lines buzzed with reports from around the globe. The crystal deposits Sam had theorized about were indeed real, and they were all awakening, creating a planetary network of impossible energy and apparent communication. Margaret found herself at the center of hastily assembled briefings, her geological expertise suddenly invaluable. The crystals were distributed along very specific geological features: ancient impact sites, tectonic boundaries, magnetic anomalies. Someone or something had seeded Earth with these devices millions of years ago, waiting for humanity to develop sufficient technology to discover and activate them. They're terraforming devices, Dr. Huang theorized during one intense session. Or rather, they were. Earth's environment has changed dramatically since they were placed. Now they're adapting, communicating, trying to understand what we've become. Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a phenomenon herself. Her sensitivity to the crystal's frequencies grew stronger by the hour. Under careful observation, she could predict pattern changes, translate mathematical sequences into visual representations, and even influence the resonance of smaller samples through focused thought. She's not unique, a child psychologist explained to Margaret privately. We're getting reports of similar sensitivities in children worldwide, all under the age of 12, all showing varying degrees of what we're calling crystalline synchronicity. It's as if the younger generation is naturally attuned to whatever frequency these devices operate on. The world outside their secure facility was transforming rapidly. The sky displays had evolved into complex holographic projections, visible day and night. Mathematical proofs materialized in the air above major cities. Star charts appeared, showing the location of systems humanity had never detected. The crystals weren't just communicating, they were teaching. Religious groups proclaimed everything, from the Second Coming to alien invasion. Scientists worked frantically to decode the flood of information being broadcast. Governments struggled to maintain order as populations gathered in streets and fields to witness the sky shows. On the 5th day after activation, Margaret stood with Emma on the ranch's observation deck, watching sheets of light dance across the heavens. The fear she'd initially felt had given way to something else. A sense of profound change, of standing at the threshold of a new era. They're beautiful, Emma said, tracing patterns in the air that perfectly matched the sky displays. They're trying so hard to talk to us, but we're like babies learning words. They have to start simple. What are they saying? Margaret asked, trusting her daughter's intuition more than the dozens of expert opinions she'd heard. Emma was quiet for a long moment. That we're not alone. That we never were. They've been watching, waiting for us to be ready. And now... She paused, her young face serious beyond her years. Now they want to meet us. The real us, not the people who hide things and keep secrets. They know about the fear, the weapons, the lies, but they also know about love and art and music. They think we're worth saving. Saving from what? From ourselves, Emma said simply. That night, the transmissions changed. Instead of abstract mathematics and stellar coordinates, images began to appear. Visions of Earth's past before human civilization, glimpses of other worlds teeming with life, and most remarkably, representations of the beings who had placed the crystals. They weren't the insectoid monsters of science fiction or the gray-skinned abductors of conspiracy theories. They were builders and gardeners, entities of such advanced consciousness that physical form seemed almost irrelevant to them. They moved between dimensions like humans walked between rooms, seeding life throughout the cosmos with the patience of geological time. The primary message, when it finally came through in forms humans could understand, was surprisingly simple. We planted seeds. You have grown. Now, we return to see what garden you have made." Margaret thought of her great-uncle, alone in his lab, making the choice to protect this discovery even at the cost of his life. He'd understood something the government hadn't, that this moment was inevitable, that humanity couldn't hide from its cosmic neighbors forever. 3 weeks after activation, the first direct contact was scheduled. The Crystal Network had identified optimal landing sites, and the beings, for lack of a better term, had agreed to a graduated introduction. Small delegations would arrive first, scientists and cultural ambassadors who could help humanity adjust to its new reality. Margaret was selected as part of the Welcome Committee, a recognition of her family's role in the discovery. As she prepared for the historic meeting, she found herself in her assigned quarters at the newly established contact site in Montana, ironically not far from her inherited property. Emma sat beside her, now wearing a specially designed suit that helped regulate her crystal sensitivity. Children like her would serve as translators, their intuitive understanding of the crystal frequencies making them invaluable bridges between species. "Are you scared, Mom?" Emma asked. Margaret considered the question honestly. Terrified, she admitted, but also hopeful. Your great-uncle believed this was meant to happen, that hiding from it was the real danger. I have to trust he was right. A soft chime indicated incoming visitors. The door opened to reveal Dr. Webb, looking years older than she had just weeks before. The government scientist who had once tried to buy Margaret's silence now worked alongside her in preparing for contact. "It's time," Webb said simply. "They're entering atmosphere now. The landing site is prepared. Are you ready?" Margaret took Emma's hand, feeling the familiar tingle of crystal resonance that now connected them in ways beyond the merely biological. Together, they walked toward the observation deck where humanity would take its next great leap into the cosmic community. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. But above those natural colors, new lights were descending, craft that seemed made of solidified light and mathematics, beautiful beyond human architectural achievements. As she watched them approach, Margaret felt the weight of her journey. From a desperate woman counting quarters in a parking lot to humanity's representative at first contact. The worthless farmhouse had contained treasures beyond imagination. The inheritance of debt had become a legacy for all mankind. The ships landed with impossible grace, their hulls shifting and adapting as they touched Earth's surface. Doors opened, though opened was inadequate to describe the way space simply reorganized itself to create passages. And then they emerged. Margaret gripped Emma's hand tighter as the first figures appeared. Tall, luminous beings that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly process. They moved with fluid grace, their forms shifting like living aurora. One of them approached, its presence both overwhelming and strangely comforting. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Margaret's mind, bypassing the need for crude sound waves. "Margaret Hartwell, keeper of the crystal, daughter of Earth, we have waited long for this moment. Your ancestor preserved what others would have destroyed. Through your courage, the silence is broken. The garden worlds are reunited." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, tears of joy, wonder, and relief. All the struggle, all the fear, all the uncertainty had led to this moment. She thought of Sam Court, whose sacrifice had made this possible. She thought of David, her late husband, who would have been amazed by this moment. She thought of all the generations before who had looked at the stars and wondered. "Welcome to Earth," she managed to say, her voice steady despite her emotions. "We've been waiting for you too, even if we didn't know it." The being's form shifted in what might have been a smile. "The wait is ended. The future begins. Come, there is much to share, much to learn. The universe has been lonely without you." As Margaret stepped forward with Emma to greet humanity's cosmic neighbors, she felt the crystal in her pocket pulse with warm light. The last inheritance from her mysterious great-uncle had opened a door to infinity. The simple woman who had inherited a worthless farmhouse had become the bridge between worlds. The stars above shone with new meaning as Earth took its place, in a community vaster and more wonderful than anyone had dared imagine. And in a small town in Montana, a neglected property with a secret in its depths had changed the course of history forever. The months following first contact blurred together. In a whirlwind of transformation, Margaret found herself at the center of a new world order, one where humanity's perspective had shifted from a single planet to a vast cosmic community. The farmhouse in Montana, once a symbol of her desperation, had become a pilgrimage site. Its underground laboratory, now a museum documenting the moment everything changed. Emma had grown into her role as a crystal interpreter with remarkable grace. At 10 years old, she moved between human scientists and alien ambassadors with an ease that amazed everyone. The sensitivity that had first manifested as strange drawings had evolved into a genuine communication bridge. She could touch a crystal and instantly understand complex concepts that took adult scientists weeks to decipher through traditional methods. The beings, who called themselves the architects in rough translation, had established embassies in major cities worldwide. Their physical forms adapted to human perception, appearing less overwhelming than during first contact, while maintaining their ethereal beauty. They explained that they had seeded thousands of worlds with life, returning periodically to guide developing civilizations through crucial transitions. Earth's activation had been delayed, they revealed, by humanity's unique tendency toward secrecy and conflict. The crystals were designed to activate naturally when a species reached certain technological and social thresholds. But humans had discovered them prematurely, and fear had driven the response. Decades of hiding what should have been celebrated. Margaret stood in the renovated farmhouse, gazing through the kitchen window at the Montana landscape. The property had been transformed into a research center and memorial funded by a grateful world government. The steel doors Sam had installed were now permanently open, welcoming scientists and visitors to learn about the discovery that changed everything. Rosa Delgado entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd become the unofficial historian of the site, documenting not just the scientific aspects, but the human story behind the discovery. "Penny for your thoughts." Margaret accepted the coffee gratefully. "I was thinking about Sam, wishing he could see this. He spent his life protecting this secret, probably died for it, and now children take field trips to see what he found." "He saw it, in his way," Rosa said gently. "Those final journal entries. He knew this day would come. He just needed to ensure it happened on humanity's terms, not forced by government agencies or corporate interests." Through the window, they watched a group of architect beings working alongside human engineers. They were constructing what they called a resonance amplifier, a structure that would enhance Earth's connection to the cosmic network. The technology they shared was revolutionary: clean energy, medical advances, space travel capabilities that made current rockets look like stone tools. But more important than the technology was the philosophical shift. The architects didn't see themselves as superior beings granting favors to primitives. They spoke of Earth as a garden that had grown wild but beautiful, praising humanity's resilience, creativity, and capacity for emotion. "Your species feels everything so intensely," one ambassador had told Margaret during an early meeting. "Joy, sorrow, love, fear, all burning bright like small suns. Most civilizations we encounter have traded such intensity for stability. You've kept the fire while still reaching the stars. This is unusual, valuable." Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing the modified lab coat that had become her unofficial uniform. Mom, they're asking for you in the deep lab. They've found something in Great Uncle Sam's personal effects. The deep lab was the most secure part of the facility, the original chamber where Sam had kept the primary crystal. The massive specimen, still pulsed with its steady rhythm, now understood to be part of a galaxy-spanning communication network. But today, the attention focused on a small metal box discovered behind a loose stone in the wall. Dr. Patricia Webb stood beside an architect-scientist named Jara, or at least that was the closest human pronunciation of their designation. The former government official had undergone her own transformation, evolving from suspicious gatekeeper to enthusiastic collaborator. "We found this during the renovation," Webb explained, gesturing to the box. "It's biometrically sealed, like the main doors were, since you're Sam's only living relative with the right genetic markers." Margaret approached the box, noting its seamless construction. As her hand touched the surface, she felt the familiar tingle of recognition technology. The lid opened, with a soft hiss, revealing a collection of items that made her breath catch. Inside lay a series of photographs, a worn leather journal, and a small crystal pendant on a silver chain. The photographs showed Sam at various ages, as a young military scientist, standing beside early computer equipment, shaking hands with presidents and officials. But the most striking image showed him with a young woman and a small child. "That's my grandmother," Margaret whispered, recognizing the face from old family albums. "And that must be my mother as a baby. I never knew he stayed in contact with the family." The journal's first page contained a letter addressed simply to "my descendant who opens this box." Margaret read aloud, her voice trembling. "If you're reading this, then you've made the choice I couldn't. You've opened the door I spent my life guarding. I want you to know that every decision, every sacrifice was made with this moment in mind. I discovered the crystals by accident, following magnetic anomalies that shouldn't have existed. What I found changed everything I believed about our place in the universe. But the world of 1957 wasn't ready. The Cold War, nuclear tensions, institutional secrecy. I watched good people become paranoid guardians of dangerous half-truths. So I made a different choice. I protected the discovery, yes, but I also prepared for its eventual revelation. I studied our family tree, followed the lives of my relatives from afar. I looked for someone who would have the right combination of scientific understanding and human wisdom to handle this responsibility. I found it in you. Your geological training, your experience with institutional blindness, your fierce love for your daughter. All of these prepared you for this moment. Even your financial desperation was part of the pattern, ensuring you would inherit the property when the time was right. The pendant in this box contains a fragment of the first crystal I ever found, the small piece that started everything. It's attuned to our family's genetic signature. Wear it, and you'll always be connected to the network, always able to sense when the crystals have something important to communicate. I'm sorry for the burden this placed on you. Sorry for the fear and uncertainty you must have faced, but I'm also proud that our family played a role in humanity's greatest moment. The architects have been patient with us. They've watched us struggle with our fears, our divisions, our tendency towards self-destruction. They planted the crystals not as a test, but as an invitation. By accepting that invitation, you've given our species a chance to join something magnificent. Watch over Emma carefully. Children like her are the bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. They see the universe without the filters of fear and prejudice that limit adult perception. Trust her instincts. They're more finely tuned than any instrument we could build. The future won't be easy. There will be those who resist change, who prefer the comfort of isolation to the challenges of cosmic citizenship. But remember this: we are gardeners now, tending not just Earth, but our corner of the infinite. Every choice matters. Every kindness ripples across the stars. Thank you for finishing what I started. Thank you for choosing wonder over fear. With love across time, Samuel Marcus Court. Margaret wiped tears from her eyes as she reached for the pendant. The moment her fingers touched the crystal, she felt it. A vast network of consciousness spanning galaxies, billions of worlds connected in a symphony of thought and purpose. It was overwhelming and beautiful, like suddenly being able to hear every conversation in a crowded city, while somehow understanding each one perfectly. Emma appeared at her side, her own sensitivity allowing her to perceive what Margaret experienced. "It's like the internet," she said with childhood simplicity, "but for souls." Jara's form shimmered with what Margaret had learned to recognize as approval. Your ancestor understood better than his contemporaries. The network isn't about technology or power, it's about connection. No species thrives in isolation. The universe is a community, not a competition. Over the following months, Margaret split her time between the Montana facility and the new Global Integration Council, where she served as Earth's primary representative for crystal-related matters. The pendant Sam had left her proved invaluable, allowing her to sense fluctuations in the network and interpret the architect's more complex communications. The changes to human society were profound, but surprisingly smooth. The architects didn't impose their culture or technology. They offered and waited for humanity to choose what to adopt. Some nations embraced everything immediately. Others moved cautiously, adapting at their own pace. The greatest transformation wasn't technological, but psychological. Knowing they weren't alone in the universe freed humanity from a deep existential loneliness most hadn't even recognized. Art flourished with new inspiration. Science advanced through collaboration with beings who had solved problems humans were just beginning to understand. Philosophy expanded to encompass perspectives from 100 different worlds. Emma became part of the first generation of truly cosmic humans. She and others like her attended schools that taught interstellar mathematics alongside Earth history, learned to think in dimensions beyond the traditional three, and developed friendships with young beings from other worlds who visited through the Crystal Network. One afternoon, as Margaret watched Emma lead a group of mixed human and architect children in what looked like a game, but was actually a complex physics lesson, Webb joined her observation. "Hard to believe I once tried to buy you off with $700,000, Webb said ruefully. "As if you could put a price on this." Margaret smiled. "You were doing what you thought was right. We all were. Even the secrecy had its purpose. It bought us time to develop, to become ready for this moment." Speaking of readiness, the architects have proposed something new. They want to take a small group of humans on what they call a garden tour, visiting the worlds they've seeded, seeing how different species have developed. They've specifically requested you and Emma join the delegation. Margaret felt the pendant pulse warmly against her chest. Through the crystal network, she sensed vast vistas of possibility. Worlds where silicon-based life created cities of living glass, planets where consciousness had evolved in the atmosphere itself, places where music was the primary form of communication. "When?" she asked. 6 months. They're constructing a special vessel, something that can carry humans safely through what they call the spaces between. Emma's already been studying navigation charts that make our star maps look like cave paintings. That evening, Margaret and Emma sat on the renovated farmhouse's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar colors while new lights danced among the stars. The old wooden boards creaked comfortably under their rocking chairs. She'd insisted on keeping some elements of the original structure. "Are you excited about the journey?" Margaret asked. Emma nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "It's Strange. A year ago we were sleeping in the car. Now they want us to represent Earth among the stars. It doesn't feel real sometimes. Nothing about this year has felt real, Margaret agreed. But maybe that's the point. Reality is bigger than we imagined. Your great-uncle knew that. He just had to wait for the world to catch up. Do you think he'd be proud of us? Margaret touched the crystal pendant, feeling its warm pulse. Through the network, she sensed something, not quite a presence, but an echo of intention, like finding a note in a bottle thrown into an ocean of time. I know he is, she said softly. As the stars emerged overhead, no longer distant and unknowable, but part of an infinite community, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The desperate woman counting quarters in a cold car seemed like someone from another lifetime. The abandoned farmhouse that nobody wanted had contained the key to humanity's future. Emma began to hum, a melody she'd learned from the architects, harmonies that existed in frequencies humans were just learning to perceive. The sound merged with the evening breeze and the distant chime of crystal resonators, creating music that belonged to no single world, but to all of them together. 6 months later, Margaret stood in the departure facility, a gleaming structure built where her uncle's old barn had once stood. The irony wasn't lost on her. The property that had been worth nothing in human currency had become priceless in cosmic terms. The delegation included scientists, artists, diplomats, and a careful selection of individuals who could represent humanity's diverse perspectives. But at its heart were those who had made this moment possible. Margaret, Emma, Rosa, and even Webb, all transformed by their roles in the Great Revelation. The architect vessel waited on the launch pad, its form defying conventional spacecraft design. It looked more like crystallized music than a vehicle, its surfaces shifting and flowing, with patterns that made Emma clap with delight. "It's singing," she announced. "It knows we're coming." Jara's form materialized beside them, radiating what Margaret had learned to interpret as joy. "Your species brings such fresh perspective. Yes, the ship sings. All our vessels do. Travel between stars should be beautiful, not merely functional." As they boarded, Margaret took one last look at the Montana landscape. The mountains stood unchanged, eternal witnesses to the transformation that had begun in their shadow. Somewhere, beneath the soil, lay the chambers where Sam Court had labored in solitude, protecting a secret too important for his time. Now that secret had set humanity free. The interior of the vessel was like stepping inside a living rainbow. Surfaces adjusted automatically to human needs, while maintaining an ethereal beauty that spoke of technologies beyond current understanding. Emma immediately made friends with the ship's consciousness, a gentle intelligence that managed navigation through spaces where ordinary physics broke down. "First stop," Jara announced, "is what you would call Kepler 438b, though we know it as the Grove of Singing Waters. The species there evolved in oceanic environments. They create art with currents and tides, composing symphonies that last for centuries." As the ship prepared for departure, Margaret found herself at an observation port, watching Earth recede. The blue marble that had been humanity's entire world now took its place as one garden among many, precious but no longer alone. Emma joined her, slipping her small hand into Margaret's. "It looks so small from here," she observed. "Small but perfect," Margaret replied, "and getting better every day." The jump to interstellar space was unlike anything human physics had predicted. Instead of violent acceleration, there was a sense of stepping sideways through reality, of moving between notes in a cosmic song. The stars blurred and reformed into new patterns as they crossed distances that light would take years to travel. During the journey, the human delegation learned and shared. The architects were endlessly curious about Earth culture, fascinated by human music, moved by poetry, intrigued by the chaotic beauty of human emotion. In return, they shared glimpses of other worlds, other solutions to the challenge of consciousness. Each garden grows differently, Jara explained during one of their teaching sessions. Some species develop hive minds, finding unity in collective thought. Others remain fiercely individual, like your species. Some transcend physical form entirely, becoming pure consciousness in crystalline matrices. There's no single path to enlightenment. Margaret found herself thinking often of Sam during these conversations. Her great-uncle had glimpsed this vast community during his solitary research, understanding instinctively that humanity would need time to prepare. His sacrifice had bought that time, ensuring first contact happened through wonder rather than conquest. The grove of singing waters proved to be a revelation. The planet's inhabitants existed as complex water forms, their bodies flowing between liquid and organized structure as needed. They communicated through pressure waves and chemical signals, creating art that was part sculpture, part music, part dance. Emma adapted fastest to their communication style, learning to interpret the subtle interplay of currents and chemistry. Within days, she was participating in simple conversations, her human perspective adding new harmonies to ancient compositions. "They think in centuries," she explained to her mother after one particularly intense exchange. "Their shortest songs last for years. They're amazed we can create beauty in minutes or hours. They want to learn our swift art, as they call it." Each world they visited expanded humanity's understanding of what was possible. Silicon-based life that built cities from their own bodies. Energy beings that danced in the coronas of stars. Collective consciousnesses that spanned entire solar systems. And through it all, the crystal network hummed with connection, allowing instant communication across impossible distances. But the most profound moment came on a world the architects called the Archive, a planet devoted entirely to preserving the history and culture of every species in their network. In a crystalline chamber that stretched for miles, Margaret found humanity's section already begun, and at its heart, given place of honor, was the story of Whispering Hills and the Court family legacy. The curator, a being of living light who had taken a form vaguely resembling a human to put them at ease, guided them through the display. Holographic recreations showed Sam's discovery, his years of secret research, his final disappearance. They showed Margaret's desperate inheritance of the property, the activation of the crystals, and the moment of first contact. "Your story resonates across the network," the curator explained. "Many species face the choice between fear and wonder when they discover they're not alone. Your family's journey from protector to revealer has become a teaching story, an example of how wisdom sometimes means waiting for the right moment." Emma studied a recreation of herself, making first contact with the crystals, her young face shining with wonder rather than fear. "We're in a museum," she said with amazement. "We're history." "Living history," the curator corrected. "Your story continues to unfold. The choices you make now ripple across the network, inspiring others, showing new possibilities." As their tour continued, visiting world after world, Margaret began to understand the true scope of what they'd joined. This wasn't just a collection of species sharing technology. It was a vast experiment in consciousness itself, a garden of infinite diversity, exploring every possible answer to the question of existence. The architects revealed that they too had been seeded by an earlier species, who had themselves been guided by others before them. The chain stretched back to the beginning of time, each generation of consciousness nurturing the next, adding new verses to an endless song of becoming. "Does it ever end?" Margaret asked Jara during one of their deeper philosophical discussions. "This chain of creation and guidance?" "Why should it?" Jara replied. "The universe expands, consciousness grows, new possibilities emerge. Perhaps someday your species will plant gardens of your own, guide new forms of awareness into being. The song continues, always adding new voices. After months of travel, experiencing wonders beyond human imagination, the delegation returned to Earth, but they came back changed, carrying within them the perspectives of 100 worlds. Margaret felt the difference in how she saw her home planet, no longer as the center of everything, but as a precious note in an infinite symphony. The farmhouse in Montana welcomed them back, its familiar walls now housing artifacts and teaching. Displays from across the galaxy, Emma immediately set about creating a new kind of classroom where human children could learn alongside holographic teachers from distant worlds. Rosa had managed the facility in their absence, maintaining Sam's legacy while adapting to the flood of visitors who came seeking understanding. She greeted them with tears and embraces, hungry for stories of the worlds beyond. How do we even begin to share what we've seen? Margaret wondered aloud as they sat once again on the farmhouse porch, the Montana mountains unchanged despite all that had transformed around them. "We don't have to share it all at once," Webb advised. She'd spent her time aboard the vessel documenting everything, creating comprehensive reports that would guide Earth's integration for generations. "Your uncle understood that. Revelation happens in stages, as people become ready." Emma, wise beyond her years from her experiences, added, "We plant seeds like the architects did. Some will grow quickly, others slowly, but they all grow eventually." Indeed, as the months turned to years, Margaret watched her daughter become one of humanity's first true cosmic citizens. Emma moved easily between worlds and cultures. Her consciousness expanded to encompass perspectives no previous human generation could have imagined. Yet she remained grounded in her humanity, in the love and wonder that had carried them through their darkest moments to this bright future. The facility at Whispering Hills became a center for interstellar education and cultural exchange. The peace crystals Sam had discovered continued to pulse their messages into space, but now they carried human voices too. Art, music, stories, dreams, adding Earth's unique harmonies to the cosmic choir. Margaret often stood in the deep laboratory, hand resting on the primary crystal that had started it all. Through the pendant Sam had left her, she could feel the vast network stretching across space and time, billions of consciousness points, connected in a web of shared purpose. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she thought she could sense an echo of her great uncle in that network. Not a ghost or a consciousness, but something subtler. The ripples of his choices still spreading outward, touching lives across the galaxy. His sacrifice had become a gift, not just to humanity, but to all conscious beings seeking connection across the void. One evening, as the sunset painted familiar colors across the Montana sky, while new constellations of visiting ships decorated the heavens, Margaret found Emma in the old barn, now converted into an art studio where humans and aliens created together. Emma was working on a sculpture, a representation of the crystal network rendered in light and sound, impossible geometries that somehow made perfect sense. Her hands moved with practiced grace, shaping energies that previous generations couldn't have perceived, let alone manipulated. "It's for the anniversary celebration," Emma explained, sensing her mother's presence without turning. 10 years since first contact. They want art that represents the journey. Margaret studied the sculpture, seeing in its flowing forms the echo of their own path, from desperation to wonder, from isolation to connection, from fear to love. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It's not finished yet," Emma replied, adding new harmonies to the construct. "Just like us. We're still becoming, still growing into what we can be." As Margaret left her daughter to her work, she reflected on how far they'd come. The woman who had inherited an unwanted farmhouse had become humanity's bridge to the stars. The child, who had slept in cars, now danced between dimensions, creating art that merged human creativity with cosmic perspective. The crystal pendant pulsed against her chest, warm and alive with possibility. Through it, she felt the network's vast contentment. Another species successfully guided through the transition, another voice added to the eternal song. She climbed the stairs to the observation deck Webb had insisted they add to the facility. From there, she could see the entire property, the farmhouse where it had all begun, the laboratories where secrets had become revelations, the landing pads where ships from distant stars now touched Earth soil daily. A message pulsed through. The pendant, not in words, but in pure meaning. The architects were proposing something new. Earth was ready to help guide another emerging species to pass forward the gift they had received. Humanity would join the gardeners, tending new consciousness in distant corners of the galaxy. Margaret smiled, touching the crystal with fingers that trembled slightly with emotion. From the desperate last hope of an evicted family to guardians of cosmic evolution, the journey seemed impossible. Yet here they stood. She thought of Sam, alone, in his laboratory, making the choice to protect rather than reveal. She thought of all the fear and wonder that had brought them to this moment. Most of all, she thought of the future stretching ahead, infinite possibilities waiting to unfold. Yes, she whispered to the network, to the architects, to the memory of her great-uncle. We're ready. Let us help tend the garden. As the stars emerged overhead, no longer mysterious but welcoming, Margaret felt the rightness of it all. Every struggle had led to this moment. Every choice had mattered. The simple woman who inherited a worthless farmhouse had become exactly who the universe needed her to be. The crystals sang their eternal song, and humanity's voice rose to join them, adding new harmonies to the cosmic choir that would echo through eternity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.